Today, we are reviewing a video commentary and rebuttal to Candace Owens that uses a really heavy messianic Christian framework to tackle some of her anti-Semitic claims.
Yeah, this piece is undeniably high octane. You can just feel the heat coming off the screen. And, the creator's tackling a volatile subject, so the anger is palpable. And, well, frankly, the subject matter justifies.
It does. But there's a tension here, isn't there? Between that righteous anger and the strategic need to persuade people who might be on the fence.
That's the whole thing.
Exactly. So, the first area we really need to dig into is the heavy reliance on these dehumanizing insults, which I think risks undermining the whole logical rebuttal.
Yeah, that's a huge barrier. When you look at the script, you see terms like cockroach Candace, El Cuckoo, the spirit of the cockroach, and useful idiot, just all over the place.
It's a recurring motif. It feels less like an argument and more like a character assassination.
Precisely. It signals to anyone who's not already on board that this is a personal vendetta, not an objective fact check. I mean, there's a line where the creator says, I can call her a demonically possessed Jew hater because that is far more accurate.
Right.
And, that might get a cheer from the choir.
The people who already agree, yeah.
But it just builds a wall for everyone else. It alienates those fence sitters who are maybe looking for a real, factual counter-narrative to what Owens is saying about the Talmud or slavery.
And it just degrades the speaker's authority, It makes it feel like YouTube drama, not a serious historical correction.
And there's a deeper risk, too. By using that kind of language, calling her a cock, the creator is inadvertently mirroring the very dehumanization he's criticized.
That's a great point. So, okay, how do we fix this? The suggestion is to maintain that moral outrage, but channel it. Channel it into dismantling the ideas, not just name-calling the person.
Right. Focus on the symptom, not...
Exactly.
What if we looked at that light metaphor the creator already uses? There's a really strong part where he says, sometimes you just got to turn the lights on. That's a powerful image.
Oh, I like that. Like is a clear alternative path. So instead of the whole cockroach thing, lean harder into that. Frame the whole piece as exposing dark lies to the light of truth.
Yes, you can be just as aggressive, just as forceful, but the target changes. So instead of saying she has compromised brain activity, which is just a petty insult.
It's just an insult, yeah.
You replace it with something sharp like, this claim completely ignores historical document X. You attack the gap in her knowledge, not the, function of her brain.
And what about that part where he says she's possessed by the god of the underworld? We could make that so much punchier for an intellectual audience.
Well, instead of that kind of spiritual name-calling, what if the creator said something like, this rhetoric mirrors the exact propaganda used by the regime she claims to despise?
That makes the Nazi comparison intellectual. It's historical.
Exactly. It moves the whole conversation from, I think she's evil, to, here is the evidence that her words match historical propaganda. That is a much, much harder argument for any skeptic to just dismiss.
Okay, let's look at the next section, which is about the core logic of the defense. The material tries to defend against the Jews control pornography trope, but the construction of it needs to be more robust than just simple whataboutism.
Yeah, this is a really critical logical point in the script. The creator rebuts her claim about Jewish dominance in the adult industry by pointing out that Andrew Tate, who she supports, is not Jewish, and he also traffics in vice.
Right, so the argument is basically, you can't blame Jews for porn because your friend Andrew Tate does it too.
That's the essence of it, yeah. But that's a tu quoque fallacy. It's a you also fallacy.
It's a deflection, not a refutation.
Totally. It's factually true, and it highlights her hypocrisy, but it doesn't actually disprove the conspiracy theory she's peddling. It just says other people do it too.
And it leaves the door wide open for someone to think, okay, sure, Tate's bad, but maybe she's still right about the disproportionate influence of this other group.
Exactly. He's playing defense when he needs to be playing offense on the logic itself.
So the suggestion here is to really deconstruct why the conspiracy theory is false, not just point to other bad actors. Attack the premise of ethnic culpability head-on.
Absolutely. And the creator actually gets so close. He briefly mentions the distinction between secular Jews and religious Jews. He calls the pornographer a secular, non-believing Jew. That's the goldmine that the script is just walking right past.
Okay, so the concrete feedback here is to expand on that. Explain why an entire ethnicity can't be blamed for the actions of a few secular individuals.
Right. Think about it. We don't blame all Christians for secular Western decadence or, Hollywood excess.
Or all Italians for the mafia.
Exactly. So instead of focusing so much on Andrew Tate's hypocrisy, focus on the statistical fallacy. Show that vice is a human problem, or a capitalist problem, not a Jewish one.
The material also attacks Owens for, quote, projecting her own demonized essence.
Yeah, and again, that's rhetoric that feels good but argues nothing. Replace that with a breakdown of settleralistic scapegoating mechanisms.
Make it a history lesson.
Yes, explain to the audience how fascists have historically used vice-like pornography or usury to turn the public against a specific group. Explain that accusing the minority of corrupting the majority is the oldest trick in the authoritarian handbook. That turns the whole segment into an educational moment about manipulation.
Okay, let's move on to structure and pacing. The third area to address is the placement of that poem 6,000,001. Right now, it disrupts the flow and it dilutes the urgency of that opening hook.
This is such a fascinating structural issue. The piece opens with this incredible energy, Phrases like wake up, true history. You see these shocking clips of her. The engine is revving. The audience is strapped in.
And then almost immediately, the car just slams on the brakes.
That's it, exactly. It just grinds to a halt to read this long, very somber poem about the Holocaust. Now, don't get me wrong, the poem is moving, it's powerful.
Of course.
But putting it right at the beginning is like a huge speed bump. It demands this quiet, mournful reverence from the listener before the creator has even fully established the logical case against her.
Right. The listener is ready for a takedown, they're ready for the fight, and they're suddenly forced into a memorial service mode way too early.
It's emotional whiplash. You haven't earned the tears yet because you haven't fully proven the danger.
I see what you're saying. So the suggestion is to move the poem, move it to the conclusion, or maybe a pivotal emotional climax after all the evidence has been laid out.
That would be so much more effective. Imagine keeping the intro just focused on the hook, those shocking clips. Keep the momentum high. Use that adrenaline to carry the viewer through the factual rebuttal.
And then you could move the poem to that section discussing Jacob's trouble in the end times.
Yes, that links the historical sorrow of the poem with the creator's theological warnings about the future. It becomes a bridge between what happened and what could happen again.
Or, even better, maybe use the poem as the outro.
Right before the buy me a coffee plug?
Exactly. Let the logic convince the mind all through the video. You hit them with facts, with history, with the light metaphor. And then, at the very end, boom, you use the poem to break the heart. It leaves the listener with the emotional weight of 6,000,001 as the lingering thought.
That is powerful, because if you put it at the start, it's something the viewer has to get through. If you put it at the end, it's the emotional punctuation mark that stays with. It changes the poem from an obstacle into a climax.
Which leads us perfectly into the final critique, which is all about audience and language. The exclusive use of this very specific end times theological language, it really limits the reach of the critique to a very narrow demographic.
It really does. I mean, the creator frames the whole conflict as spiritual warfare. He references Jacob's trouble, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, spirits of Amalek. Now, this is clearly his worldview, and that's fine. But you have to wonder if it's accidentally turning off the secular conservatives or non-messianic viewers he might be trying to reach.
Right. As it is now, the argument sounds like she's wrong because she opposes my interpretation of biblical prophecy.
Precisely. And to a secular viewer or even a Christian from a different tradition, that argument just holds no water. It gives people a back door to exit the video. They hear a word like Amalek, and they just think, oh, this isn't for me, or this is just some religious dispute.
So the suggestion here is to translate the spiritual concepts into more universal moral frameworks, widen the net without losing that religious core.
We're not saying remove the faith. The faith is clearly the engine of the piece, but you need to make the faith accessible to people who don't speak that specific theological language.
So let's look at a concrete example. The spirit of Hitler or spirit of Antichrist. How do we broaden that?
Well, you can pair those terms with their secular equivalent. So when you say spirit of Antichrist, you could immediately follow it with what we might call totalitarianism or demagoguery or blind hatred. You could say this is the spirit of Amalek, which manifests in our world as the blind, irrational hatred of a specific group. Now, a secular viewer can nod along. They get irrational hatred even if they don't know who Amalek is.
And there's that great point the creator makes where he says Owens never read the Talmud, only commentary on the Talmud.
It's fascinating. That's such a strong intellectual point. It's a smoking gun. But right now it's buried in a rant about her being demonized.
It needs to be elevated. The feedback here is to focus more on her lack of primary source research as a failure of journalistic integrity.
Exactly. Frame it as professional incompetence. She hasn't done the reading. She's relying on biased secondary sources. That's a failure anyone, atheist, Christian, Jewish, whatever, can condemn. It moves the critique from she's spiritually blind, which is subjective, to she's professionally incompetent, which is objective.
And finally, he asks that very poignant question, which side would you be on, referencing the Holocaust?
That's the strongest moment in the whole script. It's the look in the mirror moment, but it's currently tied specifically to the theology of blessing Israel to be blessed, which is a transactional argument.
So how do we expand that?
Connected to empathy, to human rights broadly. Ask the audience to consider the human cost of indifference. Ask them, when history repeats itself, will you stand with the vulnerable or will you stand with the aggressor? This invites a wider audience to condemn the anti-Semitism, not just because of a biblical mandate, but because of a universal moral imperative.
To recap, we have 4 main areas for improvement that could really elevate this piece. First, elevate the rhetoric beyond the ad hominem attacks.
Right. Swap out cockroach for the light metaphor. It builds credibility and keeps the moral high ground.
Second, we need to strengthen that logical rebuttal on the pornography trope.
Yep, move beyond the tu quoque fallacy with Andrew Tate. Deconstruct the historical mechanism of scapegoat. Make it a history lesson.
Third, we need to fix the pacing and move the poem.
The 6,000,001 poem is beautiful, but it's a speed bump at the start. Move it to the end. Let the logic convince the mind, then let the poem break the heart.
And finally, bridge that gap between the theological and the secular.
Translate that end times language into universal moral arguments. Pair spiritual warfare with journalistic integrity and human rights. Make sure the critique lands with everyone.
We would love to see a revised version of this script. Perhaps try writing a draft that focuses strictly on the historical and logical inaccuracies first, like a lawyer presenting a case, and then layers that spiritual interpretation on top. Please submit the revised work for a follow-up critique.